No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any way or by any means, whether electronic, chemical, mechanical, optical, recording, or photocopying, without prior written permission of the publisher. Title: Biblos, Symbolic Architecture. Copyright 2014 Editorial Sophia Lux Franklin. 2054 Celsius, ABA. 45,840 established by law. The deposit 723 is Diego Kurilo Biblos, Symbolic Architecture. First ed. Autonomous City of Buenos Aires. The author, 2014. 398 p. IL. 21 x 14 cm. 1. History of Architecture. First title CDD 720.09 Cataloging date, September 24, 2014. Biblos Symbolic Architecture. RQ. Diego Kurilo. To my wife Gabby and my daughter Martina for accompanying me in the discovery of the Felicitas Vitruvian, and whatever he has created for you in various colors on earth, there is indeed a sign in it for those inclined to remembrance. Al-Quran. We were exalted letters even without saying, maintained on high, stored in the highest of the peaks. Poem of Ibn al-Arabi. Index. Foreword 1, Introduction 5. Chapters. Vitruvius, the great architect of antiquity. 17. The fundamental pillar of creation. 52. Abraxas, the god of the Gnostics. 68. The cubic ratio and its relation with the Devir. 84. The Tau symbol. 104. Boaz and Jacob, the columns of King Solomon. 115. The letter Yod. 133. The etymology of the word dome. 142. The golden number in architecture. 147 Poems on the Water of Life, the Al-Andalus World, and the Octagonal Sources. 168. The Great Universal Architect. 174 Hebrew letters, Vav, Pe, and He. 188 Leonardo's knots, and the logo of his art academy. 200 Leonardo da Vinci, and the allegory of pluvial navigation. 205. 12th century stonework notebook by the construction architect Villar de Onnecourt. 209. Svastri, the oldest blacksmith in the Indo-European world. 218. The Triangle. 3.4.5. 222. El Dios Min, center of the architectural paradigm. 227. The symbolism of Miriam's hand. 239. The Wizard of Oz and the symbolism of the Boaz column. 246. The film Metropolis and the Art Deco style. 257. Abraham Abulafia and the Jewish mystic. 271. Arco, epigraph of the first cause. 283. The Indo-European myth of the turtle shell. 293. The mythology of the turtle shell in the East. 303. The genesis of the Western city. 314. The classical orders of architecture. 323. The allegory of the duplication of the cube. 354. Archaic alphabets. 368. Biblos, Symbolic Architecture. Bibliography. 376. Digital references and blog of interest. 380. General bibliography. 383. Reference films. 387. Epilogue. 388. Foreword. As all traditional doctrines and philosophies teach, the universe is a symbolic fact. An Arabic proverb says that everything can be reduced to symbols, except Tufan, the breath of fire. It is said that there is, in the first cause, an older source of symbols close to fire and the water of life, a concept close to the Quranic symbolism of water in the Arab world. The symbolic thought of the first Indo-European peoples saw in many deities the manifestation of primal fires and the wellspring of the symbolic, a certain union where the opposites stop showing through the theater of the demonstrations to lose themselves in unity. Man needs to understand what symbolism is, because without this understanding he cannot delve inside and look at yourself, being a central symbol of the earthly, in a universe without scale and time. It is our duty to discover our symbolic interiority. The purpose of this book is to bring to the reader different interpretations of logos, deities, and religions, whose symbolic expression had its genesis in architecture. Many of the Indo-European deities, in their essence, were portrayed as abstract forms and numbers, in a quest to learn mathematics and geometries associated with the universal. An example of this is the cult of Apollo, who was worshipped at Delphi as a cube, or the god Min in Egypt, one of the oldest deities in the world, who represented for that ideology not only numbers, but also the first bricklayer's rule, center of religions, strongly rooted in the architectonic. On his arm was represented the Egyptian elbow, ruler, or modular, on which the space to be made sacred was organized. The universe for these peoples personified a fundamental hill, surrounded by a mass of salty water crowned by a symbol in the shape of a potter's wheel, and at the top of which was a philosopher's cube, the most sacred space or house of Horus. For many world cultures such as the Hindu or the Cherokee in North America, the world was supported by a turtle whose shell it had drawings of hexagonal sides, like many of the trees of life in the Indo-European world, such as the Fusang tree in China. This book covers a series of events and mythologies associated with the art of construction, from the universal symbolism of the cardinal points and the circle of the earth to the Temple of Jerusalem and its creator King Solomon, passing through numerical symbolism Quranic of the water, that of the mosque, the dome, and the cathedral, all these symbols endowed with their primordial and infinite heritage. Introduction. The first chapter of this book deals with the life of Vitruvius, the great architect of antiquity, and his Codex de Architectura, a source of analysis on architectural syntax and mythologies related to the art of construction, being his Codex on the Greco-Latin construction and its symbols, the oldest preserved to date. In the following chapters, the symbols associated with ancestral gods and sacred places are shared with the reader, and how they represented numbers and geometries for peoples such as the Egyptian or the Greek, in an ideology loaded with architectural symbols. For the Bronze Age man, the earth as the continent of the world was perceived as the great house. Natural events such as the overflow of the Nile River or the observation of the North Star, the only star that appears to be motionless from the perspective of the earth, created in the imagination of antiquity the need to internalize certain events as architectural objects. In Chapter 6 and 7, the symbology of one of the most important temples for the human collective is studied, the Temple of King Solomon, its columns, and its relationship with the letter Yod. In its genesis, this logo was related to a desert deity who was worshipped as a fundamental pillar and fire for all consumers, an ancestral idea common to local people. In the following chapters, there will be a tour of architectural forms and how these were linked to Indo-European concepts such as that of the fundamental hill of creation, mythology that saw the world as a great ship-shaped construction. From them and from the search of the ancient world for architectural beauty and organicity, the concept of the golden number emerged, present throughout the natural world. Modular used in all the great works of the past as a means of organizing spaces in a harmonious way, acting as nature does in a clear and efficient way. Chapter 10 deals with poems from the Al-Andalus world and its relationship with architecture, in addition to studying cultural objects such as the bronze sea of the Temple of King Solomon that, related to the celestial, hold the key to the decoding of said architecture. Chapters 11 and 12 will describe and analyze within Egyptian society one of the world's oldest deities linked to architecture called Ptah. Its translation is great, universal architect or great potter, an archetype linked to the moon and the star Aldebaran, as the birth of Egyptian culture. The interesting thing about his character as a creative demiurge is that the initial of his name represents the number. This logo perceived not as a circle, but as a cube or parallelogram. Chapter 13 to 14 comments on the life of Leonardo da Vinci, his spiritual searches around symbols and myths such as Ariadne's labyrinth and thread, or his vision of the earth as a great ship floating in the waters of the cosmic ocean. Chapter 15 deals with the stonework notebook of Villars de Honnecourt, the only survivor of the wreck of architectural treatises from the Middle Ages. From chapters 16 to 17, forms of architecture and geometries, as well as gods representing numbers associated with the creation of the world, are studied. Chapter 18 deals with the symbolism of the hand as a bricklayer's tool. The first rule used by man was the hand, and the forearm become the sacred elbow. the medium on which the sacred space of the temples was organized. Chapters 19 and 20 analyze two films related to architecture, The Wizard of Oz and the film Metropolis. Both have their genesis in myths and legends of the Builders Guild. From chapter 21 to 24, a tour is made on various themes of symbolic architecture, such as the Hand of Miriam or Kamsa, whose analysis contributes meaning to the greetings between medieval builders, or the Greek epigraph archo, from which the word is born, architecture, passing through the classical orders of architecture and the symbolic matrix of the Western city. Vitruvius, the great architect of antiquity. The figure of Vitruvius comes to us from the ancient tradition as the author of the greatest architectural treatise, one of the few of a scientific technical nature of antiquity that survived the shipwreck of classical treatises from the ancient world, representative of the art of building and tradition, arcana related to the construction of all time. During the Middle Ages, authors such as Boethius, Isidore of Seville, Hugo of St. Victor, Gervais de Melcli, Vincent de Beauvais, William of Malmesbury, Petrus Deacon Albertus Magnus, Jean de Montreuil, among others, were illustrated with Vitruvius. Furthermore, medieval scholars such as Theodoric of St. Trond and Hildegard von Bingen were influenced by his system of planimetry, based on the human figure used as a constructive module. Many memories of the great myths of the past are related to the Vitruvian treatise on architecture. In his codex you can read and rediscover Orpheus, Aesculapius, Archimedes, Thales of Miletus, or Euclid, in addition to reading about myths like that of Perdic's nephew of Daedalus, who imagined the first bar. Little is known of Vitruvius's life, except what he tells in his own work. He may have served as a fabrum perfectum, a Roman engineer educated in the art of war machine manufacturing. He served the empire in Caesar's time and, as an engineer, specialized in the construction of crossbows and scorpions, two Roman siege engines. Furthermore, it is speculated that Vitruvius served with the military engineer, Lucius Cornelius Balbus. Architecture in Vitruvius's own time encompassed a broader field or continent of studies and disciplines than today, such as construction management, chemical engineering, materials engineering, mechanics, and urban planning. Frontino mentions it in relation to the sizes of the pipes used in Rome. For his part, Vitruvio claims to be the first to develop architectural acoustics, describes the placement of ecchias, an echo-generating machine, to highlight voices in Roman theaters. Later it was sponsored by the sister of Emperor Caesar Augustus, Octavia Minor, told by Vitruvius himself in the preface to Book 2. It is believed that he was born between 80 or 70 AC and died after the year 15, data that are speculative but can be reconstructed from his own writings. Thanks to the temples and works of Roman architecture that he mentions, De Architectura is a monumental work and the only classic technical treatise that survived the Greco-Latin world. Regarding the name of the author, it is possible that it reflects an epigraph or symbolic name, common to many sages of ancient meridian clarity, such as Pythagoras, whose name translates into the phrase gathered in the number, or Lucio Apuleo, that is translated as born in the light of Apu, the Etruscan name of Apollo, or in Berber Aphulai, whose meaning is grace. Lucio Vitruvii Polionis in Latin can be interpreted as born in the light of the emerald, tr 6 times 6, because the Latin letters can be read as numbers. Are we in the presence of a monumental architect who signed with the pseudonym Vitruvio Polion? Possibly Marco Agrippa himself, author of the Pantheon in Rome? Vitruvius writes on the cubic ratio and the number 216 in the preface to Book IV, reinforcing this thesis, and comments on how the number 216, or 6 times 6 times 6, was a sacred number for the Pythagoreans. This school of mathematics composed verses in a numerical arrangement where the number 216 would be represented. This is perceived in the radius of the dome of the Pantheon in Rome. Its second name, Polion, has been known since ancient times, which represents a nickname. This can be read in the book by Francesco Pallotti, Vitruvio, the Great Architect of Antiquity. p. 30, for the name Polion, given to Vitruvius by Faventino. The hypothesis that this combined the name of the architect with that of the founder of the world's first library in Rome, as Pliny says, who was Asinius Polion, can be accepted. In this way, an encyclopedic way of knowing about architecture, is reflected in its name. It is interesting that the name Polion was chosen. The Greek word Biblos, books, means curl, and later it was translated as papyrus scroll and books. The gematria of this word has a numerical value of 314, in a clear reference to the number. This master number is in tune with the philosophy of cubic reason, cubic center of this numerical ratio, a geometric concept found hidden in the name Vitruvi. The author's full name can be decoded as born in the light of the emerald, tr 6 times 6 times 6, or cubic ratio whose center is the number pi where the curl occurs. These symbols are associated with the golden spirals, an image created with kampas around, a cube of length 3.1415 or 6 sacred Egyptian cubits. From the perspective of ancient cultures like the Greek or the Egyptian, strongly based on an architectural interpretation of the world, the numerical spirals swirl around the number 3.1415. 9. Envision cubes of the world, a certain container box created with portions of the number. This can be discovered by studying the chamber of the king of the Great Pyramid. The book De Architectura represents a Pythagorean tetrarchies as an intellectual building, of 10 scrolls 10 books, or the architecture of the cosmos from the Vitruvian vision. Before going over the author's biography, an almost impossible task without the codex, there are no documentary data about his life, except those that he tells in his own work. We can introduce us to this world of geometries and myths related to architecture through his prose, in a review of his maxims, and the translation of the prefaces of his books. Book prize I when with your divine intelligence, as with your will, O Emperor Caesar. You possessed the domain of the land, and then, defeating and terrifying your enemies, your fellow citizens glorified yourselves in your triumphs, in your victory, and the submitted people obeyed, like the people and the Roman Senate, fleeing fear, your mandates. They trusted the national revival to your high judgment and thoughts. I doubted if I should distract you from your exclusive occupations, exposing my reasoning about architecture in the light of day, fearful that when appearing before you at an inappropriate moment, you would be an indiscreet man incurred in your disdain. But later, realizing that you care so much about state administration, that you are equally interested in public building, because with it and your initiative you enriched Rome over the provinces and conferred on it, with the testimony of superb building, the glory of the imperial city, it seemed to me that I should not defer my written work on architecture, but present it to you when before, because as an architect your father met me, whose excellence I was so admiring, having the heavenly gods consecrated to the throne of immortality, and placed before you the empire of your father, and the affectionate devotion that I had for him, and keep to his memory, it falls to you. Together with Marco Aurelio, Publio Minidio, and Neco Cornelio, I was in charge of preparing new crossbows, of the Scorpion receiving, like them, the indicated salary, through the intercession of your sister Octavia. For this benefit I am deeply grateful to you, because you took poverty away from me while I live, and allow me to write these comments for you. I am also encouraged to let you know that you have elevated numerous buildings, that you are more concerned about the public and private buildings, according to personal designs that transmit their work to posterity. Y pones tait precepts in order, so de no el primer edificio que ordenaste como lo fueron y serán los siguientes, añadiendo todas las reglas del arte. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century BC. Prum to Book 2 extract. The architect Dinocrates is renowned for his promptness and for the dignity of his name, but O Caesar Emperor, nature has not favored me as he did in stature, age has aged my face and strength they have weakened me over the years, lacking physical gifts, I can only recommend you for my knowledge and my writings. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century BC. Prum to Book 2 extract. Believing Dinocrates to be mocking, he advised himself for the attempt. He was tall, with a pleasant face and of the greatest majesty and greatness. Confident in these natural gifts, he took off his clothes in the inn, he covered his whole body in oil, he put a poplar wreath on his head, he covered his shoulder right with a lion's skin, and with his nail in his right hand, he went to appear before the court of Alexander the Great, who at that time was administering justice. The novelty caught the attention of the people who were ahead, so the king saw and admired him and sent him forward, and asking him who he was, he replied, I am a Macedonian architect. I bring you inventions and works worthy of your majesty. I have formed a model of Mount Athos as a figure of man who has in his left hand a great city, and his right hand a cup, in which all the waters of the rivers that are in it are received, so that from there they fall into the sea. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century BC. According to legend, Alexander the Great despises the blueprint of the city on Mount Athos because there is no water in it. Prum to Book 2, Extract. If then, as Socrates intended, feelings, judgment, and doctrines fed in the studio, they will be visible with evidence in the work of individuals, nothing would be worth the favor, nor the personal machination, but we would see spontaneous success happen to those who express knowledge through serious and manifest application to study. But since these aptitudes do not appear in the works as diaphanous as we would need, and also, since we see the ignorance rejoice more than wise, declaring to debate with people without instruction, I intend to show with the publication of these precepts my knowledge and my virtue. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century BC. Proem for Book 4, Extract. The possessions of fortune disappear as easily as they were obtained, while those of wisdom pervading bravery never disappear and will last as firmly as existence. For this reason I recognize you from my ancestors, who, following the Athenian usage, illustrated me in such an art that it cannot be taken into account if it is not supported by literary culture and encyclopedic knowledge of architecture. Having therefore increased my knowledge through the work of my parents and the teaching of the teachers, and having become passionate about the literary unknowns and technical writings related to them, my spirit endeavored in its possession. The maximum fruit I synthesized, saying that I do not need anything from others and I don't want anything, not even abundances. However, some judging my judgment little consider only those who have money capable. This consent has allowed these and those who deploy this purpose and act with fearlessness, obtain wealth and with them fame. I, however, O Caesar, I have not bowed down to procuring money from my art. I have preferred to live poorly with a good reputation to pursue wealth and achieve it with bad popularity. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century BC. There are three parts of architecture: building, mnemonics, and mechanics. Mechanics as a whole has been generated from nature itself, under the guidance and direction of cosmic rotation. That's right. If we consider and observe the incessant translation of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets, we will understand that if they did not go through their orbits mechanically, it would be impossible for us to have light on Earth. Vitruvius Polion, Hesti century BC. Quod non ab industria nec artis solertia, sed a felicitate fuent deserti, ut teleas Atheniensis, Cion Corinthios, Meagros Phocaios, Farax Ephesios, Boidas Byzantius etiamque alii plurs. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century B.C., Prum to Book 3. Extract. And it is not that his works lacked utility, mastery, and talent, as happened with the Athenian Hegias, Quion of Corinth, Meagro of Phocaea, Farax of Ephesus, Boedas of Byzantium, and many others. It is the felicitas Vitruviana, the wisdom that is reached with the teaching of an art that cannot be cultivated, if it is not thanks to a complete education and a total discernment of all kinds of instructions. The author of the Architectura, he describes his ideology at the center of his treatise. Omnia nim munera fortunae cum dantur, ab ea faciliter dimuntur disciplinae vero conjunctae cum animis nullo tempore deficient, sed permanent stabiliter et summum exitum vitae. The all gifts that fortune confers, she herself easily removes. But science, knowledge of architecture is modeled with intelligence. It does not fade with the passage of time, but remains stable until the end of our lives. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century BC. Nullas plus habendi esse necessitates eamque. That proprietem, diviciarum maxime, nihil, desiderar. The greatest benefit is not creating needs, accepting that the greatest wealth is not wanting anything. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century BC, Proem for Book 6 Extract. The philosopher Aristopo, Socrates' student, victim of a shipwreck, arrives at the shores of the island of Rhodes, and when he sees some geometric figures drawn in the sand, they say that he shouted to his classmates, "We are saved, I observe men's tracks." He immediately went to the city of Rhodes and turned directly to the gym. He began in that place to discuss philosophical topics, and was the object of various gifts that not only served to equip himself in a distinguished way, he also provided his companions with clothing and everything necessary for living. His companions wanted to return to their country of origin and asked him if he wanted to give any message to those from his homeland. He ordered them to count when they arrived. It is necessary to educate the children with food and resources that allow them to swim safely, even in a shipwreck. Vitruvius Polion, 1st century BC. Different translations of Vitruvius' treatise along the history. The Harlesian Codex from the British Museum, the Gudeian Codex from the Wolf-Butel Library, the Silitadino Codex from the Schellestad Library. Most European libraries have codices after the year 1000. The Cottonico in the British Museum of the 11th century. 3 Parisian codices from the 11th century, 2 codices in l'Idée del X century, 2 in the Escorial dating from the 11th century. For its part, the Vatican has 25 codices but almost entirely from the 14th and 15th century. The rediscovery of the Vitruvian Treaty during the Renaissance is due in part to the Florentine humanist Poggio Bracciolini, who, along with Leon Battista Alberti, has the honor of making this work widely known in his fundamental treatise on architecture from Re Edificatoria, c. 1450. Another well-known edition of Vitruvius was presented in Rome by Fra Giovanni Sulpizio in 1486. Petrarch translated part of the 14th century treatise from Latin to Italian, the influence of which is seen in the work of César Césarin. Translations were also made in French, Jean Martin, 1547, English, German, Walter H. Riff, 1543, and Spanish, among other languages. The original illustrations had been lost, and the first illustrated edition was published in Venice in 1511, with engravings in wood based on the descriptions of the original text, probably by Fra Giovanni Giocondo. Más tarde, en el siglo XV, Andrea Palladio did Illustraciones for Daniele Barbaro with comments by Vitruvio, who appeared in the Italian and Latin versions. However, the most famous illustration is from the 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. In relation to the achievement of Vitruvian happiness, it can be read in a Chrisman 5th century. Avar viam violatibi est arcenti pondera sedant. PLVs ESTQVD propria felicitate knights. Fell gold is for you, silver loses weight. It is more valuable for your own wisdom to shine. There is a history and certain mythology associated with Archimedes. Vitruvius comments in his book on the discovery of the principle that bears his name. Legend has it that the genius of Syracuse pronounces the word eureka, today synonymous with achievements of all kinds, when he enters his bathtub and realizes that the volume of displaced water falls along the circular edge of it. This displacement is equal to the volume of your body. In this way, he creates the theoretical practice of what was later called the Archimedean principle. This foundation you describe, a body totally or partially submerged in a fluid at rest, receives a push from the bottom up equal to the weight of the volume of the fluid it displaces. Vitruvius comments that the geometer, realizing such a discovery, runs naked through the streets of Syracuse shouting, "Eureka, Eureka, I have found him." The story appears written for the first time in the De Architectura Codex. King Hieron of Syracuse presents Archimedes with the problem of how to determine if the gold crown his goldsmith had made was pure gold. The king suspected that the goldsmith had deceived him and cast silver into gold as a way to equalize the weight of the crown. The problem kept Archimedes sleepless for several days until, exhausted and advised by his wife, he takes a bath, finding that the displaced water is equal to the volume of the object that enters the water. Today it is known that the technical engineering necessary back then to measure the displacement of an irregular volume in water had not been invented. Galileo himself, centuries later, he pondered these questions by creating a hydrostatic balance model with enough precision to carry out such a measurement. The story is symbolic and refers to the search and discovery of decimals in the number. Archimedes, he was the first mathematician to use regular and sided polygons as a method for calculating a default and excess approximation of. The method used by him consisted of circumscribing and inscribing regular polygons in circles and calculating the perimeter of said polygons. Archimedes started with circumscribed and inscribed hexagons, and doubled the number of sides until he reached 96-sided polygons, a method that he may have learned from Egypt. obtaining the number 3.1416. Archimedes in Greek axionons is an epigraph, possibly the title of an academy of geometry, or simply a symbolic name. It is made up of two words, which can be translated separately. The first part of the name, arku, api, translates as the principle of universal construction, the guiding axis of construction or the first cause of it. This word gives birth to the word architect and architecture, as well as arcane, arcade, and Arcadia. The second part of his name, Unwon Medes translates as nothing, no thing, no man or nobody. In this way, the full name can be interpreted as APX, the principle of the construction of nothingness, or the principle of the construction of emptiness. At this point, there is some parallelism with the Egyptian god Ptah, known as Great Universal Architect. His oldest epithet is the Destroyer of Images Egyptian Book of the Dead, with translation by Wallace Sponge. Cicerone, he describes the Archimedean tomb that he had visited and indicates that above it was a sphere inscribed inside a cylinder and on it an engraving with the symbol. Archimedes had proved that the volume and area of the sphere are 2/3 of that of the cylinder that inscribes it, including its bases, which was considered the greatest of his mathematical discoveries. The names of characters, such as Archimedes, Vitruvius, or Pythagoras, including ancient deities such as Ptah or Apollo, were thought of as continents of a great attractor or monad, number 3.1415, the oldest name of the deity. The number, for the imaginary of antiquity, represents the world of divine ideas and thoughts, a certain architecture where word form and sound form visible reality, the power on which life is fertilized, an absolutely undifferentiated abstraction called fullness. Example of names or epigraphs whose genesis was numerical. Many names that come to us from the past can only be understood through their gematria, the geometry of the word, the numerical value of the letters. There are deities that essentially function as geometric enigmas, as in the case of the name of the god Osiris. In Greek sigma iota, their numerical value per letter is equal to 70, sigma equal to 200, iota equal to 10, rho equal to 100, iota equal to 10, equal to 6. If we study the anthology of the letters that make up the name of Osiris, graphemes that were born in Egypt in the shadow of certain deities, the numerical value of the letters would be 16 to 6, 10 to 3, 1416 to 10 minus 6. The letter O, initial of the name Osiris, comes from an Egyptian logogram in the shape of I, whose numerical value is 16. The translation of its hieroglyphic name is Throne of the Eye, and its most important epithets are Lord of Love, the beautiful hair or Lover of Silence. The pronunciation of his name could be reconstructed as Usir, Usiris, Osar, or WSR.
La otra fuente para la letra O es el logograma con forma de gorrión que para aquel ideario simbolizaba el sonido creador o verbo staged in number 6.
The Latin letter P-shaped rho is born from an Egyptian cube-shaped graphic whose representation is the number Pi, initial of the divine name Ptah, a deity known as the Great Universal Architect. The cubic character of its name represents the number 0.5236mx, equal to 3.1416, 6 times the Egyptian sacred elbow. If we study the numbers that make up the name of Osiris's, we see reflected in sacred elbows the proportion of the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, or a cube of side 6, whose length is 3.1416. Another source of the grapheme rho is the mouth symbol, one of the names of the Egyptian god Ra. Another rarity of the name is that in Greek contains the name of the goddess Iris, rainbow. Another epigraph that, when studied, contributes meaning is the name of Thought, god of wisdom and writing in Egypt. He is the main creator demiurge, along with the god Ptah, of all Egyptian cosmology. Thought, in Greek, theta omega theta, has gematria 818, u theta equal to 9, omega equal to 800, theta equal to 9. 9 represents for the Greek and Egyptian ideology an exit from the numerical paradigm. The letter omega has its genesis in the sparrow-shaped Egyptian logo, whose pronunciation is A, related to the 2008 inch of the Egyptian sacred elbow. This letter is geometrically related to the Hebrew letter Pi. Both have 800 gematria. The letter Pe has its genesis in a cube-shaped Egyptian logo of the divine name Ptah, whose geometric representation is a cube of 6 sacred cubits in length. The other source of the logo is the mouth-shaped Egyptian hieroglyph, related to the worship of the god Ra, numerical sun. Other Hebrew words with 800 mega-amperes kesheth gematria are bow, archer, rainbow. It is no coincidence that thought was represented as ibis, the bird with a curved beak associated with the phases of the moon. If we study the gematria of the word kesheth rainbow, we can discover that the letter Pe, whose gematria is 800 related to the number pi, is followed by the letter Shin Corona from gematria 300 and the letter Jet whose gematria is 8. All this allows us to reach interesting conclusions. The golden crown arrives when the 8-pointed star is incorporated. La summa geometrica of these numbers is 1108, equal to the word Sabbat. In this context, the number 1811 represents 2 lions in the sunrise. 2 lions of cosmic strength guarding the emerald-eyed queen, a symbol that appears in all the mosques of antiquity, like the Alabaster Mosque in Cairo. Another word with 800 gematria is pistis, whose meaning is belief, those who believe in fidelity, the conviction of the truth of something, of beliefs, of a conviction, or respect of man's relationship with God and the divine things. From the Greek perspective, belief in the number as creator archetype and representative number of deity. If we break down the word pistis into 2 parts, we originally obtain for the first part the character a cube of side 6, whose length is 3.1416. The second part, istis, translates as sail, spiderweb, fabric, warp. Therefore, the belief rotates and is woven around the number, a number considered sacred in ancient times. The translation of pistis can be interpreted as fabric or warp around a philosophical
Cube of length, P-bus length.
Pistis Sophia, the truth or belief in wisdom. There is a legend associated with the creation of the first measure, such as the potter's wheel. Perdix Greek, he was the son of Daedalus's sister of whom he was a student. He is considered the inventor of various instruments, including the saw and the compass. This idea is said to have been inspired by the jaw of a snake or the back of a fish. His abilities provoked Daedalus's jealousy, who ended up pushing him from the top of the Temple of Athena on the Acropolis. The goddess who favors wit saw him fall, rescued him, and transformed him into a bird. The partridge does not make its nest in the trees or fly high, but nests in the hedges and avoids the high places aware of its fall. Mythology tells that Daedalus was banished by this act. The name Perdix can be symbolically interpreted as the flight of the spinning bird around the number pi. The root of the word per is Indo-European, and its meaning is before or behind. Perd also means belly noise. The myth of Perdis refers to a bird perching on a burial mound. At this point, there is some parallelism with the mythology of the fundamental hill of creation, an Indo-European type myth that appears in all ancient cultures. Ovid's Metamorphosis, Book VIII. To him, while in the burial mound he put the body of his poor born, gargle from a silty holm oak. A partridge watched him and applauded with his wings and witnessed his joy for his singing were only then that bird and not seen in the previous years, and recently turned into a bird. Long crime for you, Daedalus, was, for he had given her ignorant from his fates, so that he could teach his father-in-law to his father, his birthday a dozen times past, a boy capable of the precepts. He even, the thorns that in the middle of a fish are pointed out, took them out for example, and in a sharp iron he carved some perpetuous teeth and saw found use. The first one also 2 iron arms with a single knot linked, so that, for an equal distance between them, one part would stand still, the other part would draw a circle. Daedalus envied him, and the sacred precinct of Minerva he sent him headlong, slipped lying to him, but he, the one who encourages the mills, welcomed Pallas, and bird returned it, and half veiled it from the feathery air. But the vigor of his wits, one swift day to his wings and feet departed. The name, which also before, remained. No, even so, this tall bird its body does not raise nor make its branches in the branches and the tall crown. Close to the earth, she flutters and lays her eggs in the hedges, and in memory of her former fall she is afraid of heights. Ovid's Metamorphoses, Book 7, on the labyrinth, the Minotaur, and Ariadne. The shame of her generation had grown, and shameful adultery manifested itself from that mother by the novelty of the biform monster. Minos decides this modesty of his thalamus to suppress, and in a multiple house and blind ceilings to enclose him. Daedalus, because of his talent for highly celebrated factory art, puts on the work, and confuses the signs and lights with the crooked detour of its various routes leading to error. No other way that the Phrygian meander in the limpid waves plays, and with its ambiguous fall it ebbs and flows, and rushing to meet it looks at the waves that are to come, and now towards its springs, now towards the open sea, its uncertain waters fatigue. Thus Daedalus fills his innumerable ways of error, and he could hardly return to the threshold, so much is the fallacy of that ceiling, in which after the twin figure of a bull and young man locked up and the monster, with active blood twice grazed, the third draw dominated him, repeated at the 9th years, and when with virgin help it was found, not repeated by any of the above, that difficult door with the thread collected, to the point the Aegida abducted the Menoid, gave Dia candles, and her cruel companion, on that coast she abandoned. To her, abandoned and lamenting many things, his hugs and her help were offered by Liber, and so that by a perennial clear star he was, clutching his crown, he sent her to heaven. She flies through the faint auras, and as she flies her gems turn into clear fires, and the aspect remains as a crown, which means that the one resting on her knee is, and the one the serpent has. Ovid's Metamorphoses, Book the 8th, about Daedalo and Icarus. Daedalus, meanwhile, for Crete in his long exile full of hatred and touched by the love of his native place, locked was in the sea. Even though lands, he says, and waves oppose me, but the sky certainly opens, we will go there. Everything that Minos owns does not have the air, he said, and his spirit refers to some unknown arts and nature innovates. Well, he puts in order some feathers, at least started, to a long one, shorter, so that on a slope that had grown you think, thus the rustic fistula one day gradually arises, with its disparate oats, then with linen the ones in the middle, with waxes join the ones below, and thus made up of a small curvature, he folds them so that he imitates true birds. The child Icarus was one at a time, and ignoring that they were dealing with their own dangers, now with a bright face, those that the vague aura had moved, tried to seize those feathers, now the flawless wax with the fluffy thumb, and with his game, the admirable one his father's work prevented. After the last hand to his imposed company was gone, his craftsman swung his twins to his own body, and in the aura moved by it was suspended. He also instructs his born, and in the middle of the path you run, Icarus, he says, I warn you, so that if you are more despondent you will go, the grave wave of your feathers, if higher, the fire will burn them. Between the one and the another flies, and don't look at the boyero or the Ursa sent you, and the wielded sword of Orion, with me as a guide, take the path. To the pair, the precepts of flying give him, and unknown to his shoulders, he accommodates the wings. Between this work and the counsels, her old cheeks got wet, and her father's hands trembled. He gave kisses to his newborn one that, again, he would not repeat, and with his wings raised in front, he flies and fears for his companion, like the bird that from above, his tender offspring has pushed the nest into the air and exhorts them to follow her and instruct in the harmful arts. He also moves his, and the wings of his newborn turn to look. To some of them, while trying to capture some fish with his trembling rod, or a shepherd with his staff, or a plowman leaning on his bed, he saw them and was suspended, and those that the ether could catch, he believed to be gods.